contention of Sparta on the Greco-Persian War and the Battle of Thermopylae is important, it overlooks Sparta's institutions, army, and government. So the Agoge was the main institution in Sparta. It began at birth, where a group of elders would inspect the newborn to see if it was fit to live in Spartan society. If it failed to pass, they would leave it out to die. However, Plutarch claims that they actually threw the babies off Mount Taygetus, which is awful. If the baby passed, though, they would stay with their parents until the age of 7. When they reached 7 years of age, they would be taken to the military-style barracks of the Agoge. Now, the Agoge was a very brutal institution, where they would have the older boys beat up younger boys, and they would have the most terrible kinds of games. One of which, they would take the boys down to the Eurotas River at the Temple of Artemis, and they would flog each boy to see which one would last the longest, and this would be a form of entertainment for the crowds nearby. They would stay in the Agoge for up to the age of 20, when they were expected to complete the rite of passage, which was killing a helot without anyone knowing. If they were successful, they would graduate into the Spartan army. Now, the army was an extremely effective fighting force, and the army was tied to one's honor. The Spartan army was so effective because it was such a flexible and maneuverable force, because instead of having a phalanx that was just 25, they would have phalanxes in rows of 8 instead of 25. This allowed them to have greater flexibility and maneuverability over their larger counterpoints. The phalanxes would also be divided into what would today be called battalions, companies, and platoons. And this allowed for greater maneuverability while keeping phalanx cohesion. The army in the phalanxes would also have the first 5 rows have their pikes forward in order to penetrate the enemy's shield wall. Now, the shield wall was tied to one's honor, especially in Sparta. If you lost your shield, it was a great dishonor, because if you lost your shield, that means that the whole battalion could have fallen because of you. And so Spartan never wants to lose his shield. He would either be with his shield or on his shield, which means you would either survive or you would die in battle. And there's a story of this one soldier who survived out of all the rest. And when he was coming back, his mother was so filled with shame because her son had survived when everyone else had died, that she picked up a stone and killed him with it. The Spartans also fought with swords, but they were unusually short. The swords were made out of iron and were more like daggers than swords, really. And there's this story of one young boy who complained to his mother that his sword was too short, and his mother replied, "Just step closer to the enemy." So finally, The Spartan government was one of the most divided in all of Greece, as there were 4 different branches of government. The first is the dimonarchy. Now, this was a kingship between 2 kings, and Aristotle described them as more of hereditary generals than kings. The kings had very limited power outside of leading the army, and what power they did have was overseen by the ephors. The ephors was a group of 5 people, and their name literally means overseers. And Aristotle complained that they were too powerful, but the ephors had the executive power and overlooked the institutions, including the agode and set officials. And this is what Aristotle complained about, because that's a really powerful job among just 5 people. Thirdly, the Gerousia was a council of 30 members where they would decide on 2 things, because they only had 2 powers. They would either decide on the topic, that would go to the demos, which is called pre-deliberation, or they would act in emergency as the Spartan Supreme Court for the kings when the kings had committed some crime, which is not very common. So the Gerousia's main power is pre-deliberation, which is deciding what topics should be presented to the demos. And at one time, the Gerousia was so powerful that they could even override some decisions of the demos if they didn't like how it was decided on or expressed. So the final branch is the demos, which is one of the most democratic governments or branches of government in Sparta. It decides on judicial matters, and it votes on saying yay or nay by yelling. And the reason why they yell and not raise their hands is because raising your hand is a sign of surrender in Spartan culture. And the demos, it probably only existed after 675 BC, since the requirements to be in the demos is to be a Spartan warrior soldier who has never missed their payments, haven't done any public misdemeanor, or have been born illegitimately. So, in summary, while the historical attention of Sparta's role in the Greco-Persian War and the Battle of Thermopylae is important, it overlooks Sparta's institutions, army, and government.